Welcome, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. If you have, I'm trying to advance the slides. If you have technical or content-related questions during the presentation, please use the Q&A window, and we will address your questions. Closed captioning is available by selecting the Closed Caption button in the bottom right corner of your media player screen. You can expand, minimize, and move each of the window panes displayed on your screen. And don't forget to visit our additional resources available in the resource list. We encourage you to download any resources or links that you might find useful. And now I would like to introduce you to today's featured presenters. Today we have from Oracle, April Hawthorne, Senior Director, Product Management. Joining us from Argonaut is Chris Mario, Vice President of HCM Solutions. From Oracle, we have Lori Pearson, Group Vice President, HCM Transformations. I would now like to pass it over to Lori to begin today's presentation. Lori?
Great, thanks so much, and welcome to everybody that's decided to join us today. Really appreciate it. We have, over the last year, when we have all been speaking with customers, whether it was April, Chris, or myself, AI has become the #1 topic, and we watched it begin to rise last year, and now it seems to be on everybody's discussion panel as we kind of look forward. And so what we decided to do was really come together, bring not my best mind, but certainly April and Chris's together to talk about different, I would say, ways that we can begin to think about AI as it relates specifically to HR. And what I found as I've gone through these conversations is just really starting with a grounding of the different types of AR, just to make sure. I have a friend who used to say that consistent definitions are the beginning of wisdom. So we're going to spend a little bit of time covering consistent definitions. We'll talk about generative AI in HR, how to evaluate those opportunities, what does that look like, and how do we build skills and knowledge for our HR professionals. And then what does it take to begin to launch that in our organizations? We really hope that you have questions. Our intent is that we'll have a dialogue here and invite you into that conversation as well. So we know that artificial intelligence isn't new. It's been around for a long time. We talk about how does it mimic the human mind, and how do we leverage that in our day-to-day experiences? So let me pass it off to April to have a little bit more discussion with us around how do we think about AI and sort of the history around it and the ways that we define it.
Yeah. Thanks, Lori, and welcome everyone to today's webinar. If you've been reading the headlines, 2022 is definitely a watershed year when it comes to artificial intelligence. And there's been a lot of terms thrown at us in the past year. You may have played with ChatGPT. You may have heard terms like large language models and artificial intelligence and data science. And so many new terms have been thrown into the mix of our everyday language. And what's really fascinating is that AI as a branch of computer science has been around for a very, very long time. And even the concepts that drive ChatGPT, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment, were first posited back in the 60s when some very, very early LLMs were created. And it's really just in the last few years where our computer technology, the chips that power all of this computation required, have been able to keep up with the concept of these algorithms and deal with the large volumes of data. So it's a really exciting moment for all of us. I don't think, I was talking with one of my leaders and my mentors, no one can quite map this to anything they've experienced in the industry. It's been a really big change, a shift. Even people who are not in technology are talking about this topic right now. And that makes it really important for us, as we think about what we're doing in the industry and the enterprise, and specifically in HR. We are all technologists. If you have typed a question or a comment or a statement into ChatGPT, congratulations, you can add prompt engineer to your resume. You are now part of this amazing revolution. And one of the first places to start, I love, Lori, your point about a common definition leading to wisdom, is to kind of get some straight clarity around these terms. They don't all mean the same thing. The easiest way to think about this is artificial intelligence is sort of an umbrella term. It covers a lot of different concepts, including a lot of the computer science that has driven some of this technology. The type of artificial intelligence that drives things like ChatGPT is something very specific within the world of AI. It's known as generative AI, or Gen AI, you may have heard people call it. Generative AI is pretty unique compared to other types of AI models. We have seen in the past AI prediction engines, AI recommendation engines. If you use Netflix, you've probably experienced a few movie recommendations based on your viewing history, or you've seen this in Amazon where they might suggest other products based on your browsing history or purchase history. Those are very common types of AI, what we call data science models, the machine learning models. Those models are used for very specific types of use cases like recommendations and predictions. And they recognize patterns in data sets like your viewing history. What makes generative AI such a new and revolutionary thing is that it's actually creating content. And that's where it differs greatly from what you've seen before or interacted with before, whether it's generating text or even audio or visual content. AI, and generative AI specifically, has been trained and engineered and designed for that purpose. So if you've ever asked ChatGPT to write you a poem or maybe write a song for you, it has that capability to generate new content. And one of the really cool ways that it's done that is being trained on very, very large and massive training data sets, which is very distinctive and different from old recommendation and prediction engines. So when you think about ChatGPT, it's been trained somewhat indiscriminately on the entire internet. And if you can just think about all the corners of the internet, there's lots of data there. Some of it good, some of it bad, some of it flat out incorrect or imaginary. And so that's something to kind of keep in mind, that whether we're talking about generative AI or some of the more classic types of machine learning use cases for recommendations and predictions, the data that an AI solution is trained against is the most important aspect of how good that AI is and how valuable that AI is to the bottom line. So hopefully coming out of this session, you'll be able to know that if somebody says large language model, they're talking about generative AI. If they say generative AI, they're talking about large language models, they're talking about ChatGPT. These are all similar terms that work together. But artificial intelligence really is that bigger branch. And there are other types of machine learning. Many vendors out there have lots of these solutions already, and we'll talk about some even in the Oracle space. But the interesting aspect of this, with your CEOs and your CIOs buzzing with wanting to maybe turn on AI, it's important to know that AI is bigger than just ChatGPT, and there's a lot to look at here when it comes to what can be valuable for you and your enterprise. So there's definitely a drive. When I was at Cloud World last year, I spoke with a CIO who had actually been given very specific rollout initiatives from his CEO to get AI in multiple different solutions that they already had. And his goal is to get them rolled out by the end of this calendar year, 2024. I'm sure there's a lot of interest and expectation, and certainly in human resources, I think one of the things that makes me so excited about what AI can do in human resources is take away some of the drudgery. This is a space where spreadsheets are still an important aspect of how human resources work. There's so much data in disparate systems. Anything we can have that is a tool that lets us do our job faster and better is really a benefit for teams like ours, where honestly, human resources always understaffed and overwhelmed, and especially in these days where HR is being asked to do even more than they've ever done before. So I think of this as a really powerful tool in the toolkit. And like any tool in the toolkit, there's a lot of opportunity You've certainly seen your studies, I'm sure. I'm going to share a couple with you today. But what we're seeing is an interest in getting more work done quicker. And I think when you think about productivity specifically, one of the common use cases we have in the world of HR is writing a job requisition. And if you think about the last time you wrote a job requisition, how long did that take you? Did you have to go find a copy of a job requisition somebody had written previously? Did you have to tune that job requisition? Was it out of date, maybe written a few years ago and no longer quite valid for the company? Do you have the right template and format? All of these questions end up turning into hours and minutes where somebody is sitting, working, and trying to come up with something that's relatively standardized. With generative AI, something that's creating content for us, has the ability to create things like job requisitions. And with that ability to boost and start with something to review versus starting from scratch, you're already getting a quick gain in productivity. And I think that's really the thing to think about with AI is that productivity gain. I think the other aspect is that generative AI is not going to just help HR, right? It's very, very clear that lots of industries are going to benefit from generative AI. And I think inherent in this is this overarching concern, right? I've heard from many of my customers that there's a concern that Gen AI is going to take away their jobs, going to reduce staff. And I think that's normal. I think that's normal to fear when we have new technology coming into the space. And I think that what AI is going to open the door for is for us to work differently and to leverage skills that AI is nowhere close to yet. As a kind of little story, I'll tell you, one of my clients asked me at Cloud World last year if AI is ready to make business decisions for him. And I said, no, not yet. I certainly wouldn't recommend it. Now, technically, it probably could make a decision, but whether you'd agree with it is quite another thing entirely. I think that we're not yet in the world of Hollywood and AI that is thinking just like us. And I actually think that, the human part of human resources becomes even more incredibly important, right? Now, if you can have a machine create a job requisition or create other content that took you a long period of time to generate, you can start with that. Now you've got a smart individual who can think through what's best for the company, what's best for strategy, what's best for that particular environment. And I think it's a change in the way we work. And I think we should be embracing tools that allow us to do that better. And I really feel like generative AI is very well positioned for back office types of functions like HR. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure that there's a lot of push probably from your technologists in your organization, and there's probably interest that you have yourself. You've probably read AI on every single vendor's website. It's certainly been the buzzword over the last year. And I think the things to think about, though, is as a leader, is to really start to get grounded. There's a lot of buzz. There's a lot of talk. Not all of it is valid. And there's a lot of over-promising right now some vendors are doing with what generative AI is and what it isn't. And I think it's really important that despite the fact that not every one of us was trained as a data scientist, we are all at the end of the day a technologist, and we work with technology. And these concepts are core, not just to what we're doing every day, but they're core to where our future is going, right? I think we're going to find more and more ways that AI starts to become a part of our everyday life, for better and for worse. I think that when you're looking at AI and vendor solutions, one of the key things you're going to want to consider is what is going to provide value for you. And looking at very fine-grained areas of work where this is where we're losing time and energy, this is where we need some assistance and support. Those types of use cases are going to be where you should focus and start your AI journey with, right? Think about what's really going to boost productivity. And the last thing is really just prioritizing. AI, big umbrella term, can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. But the great news is you don't have to turn AI on everywhere, right? And I think that's the powerful part of this for HR is you can decide that one use case might be of really great value to your group, but some of the others you're just not ready for yet. And I think that's a very valid place to start, right, in your journey. Think about what really is driving that change and what's really going to help you and your business do things better. So as you think about what's coming next, where do you take some of those priorities? Setting a vision, this is going to be a journey. Turning on AI is not quite the same as implementing a brand new process. You're going to have a lot of internal training. You're going to have to get other people in your organization grounded in some of these concepts. And you absolutely have to bring your legal and compliance teams along for this journey, right? There's absolutely an important deep dive to do when it comes to ensuring you're not introducing bias into your environment, that your combination of technology and regular processes are really looking out for that, right? And we've actually seen many of our customers go down that path where legal and compliance have played a role every step of the implementation to verify, validate, and ensure that everything was really going to move the needle in the right direction. I think the other thing I encourage folks to think about with AI, and this is actually an anecdote I'm stealing from a Harvard Business Review article I read, but I thought it was a really great anecdote. There's a tendency to think that anything that comes from technology or computer is perfect or always right. And one of the things that you're probably more familiar with as opposed to AI is flying on a commercial jet. I'm sure you're aware there's things like autopilot set up on these big commercial airliners. And what's really interesting about autopilot, it's an incredible tool and it does a lot of amazing things. But the second something goes wrong, autopilot turns off and the control is handed back to the pilot. And that's because the pilot is going to be best able to make those more complex decisions and know from experience. And I think that analogy is really critical in the way that we think about and frame what AI is going to do in our environment. It's not a solve. It's not going to solve every problem we have yet. I'm sure it will one day. But right now, the thing to think about is, how can AI help me? And how does my end user in the environment, whether it's my recruiters, my hiring managers, or my employees, what is their ask as they interact with these new tools and technologies? I'll share another quick anecdote too to think about this. You may have heard last year that a lawyer leveraged ChatGPT to create content for the legal brief that he submitted to a judge in a real life case. And it turned out that the content that that lawyer generated with ChatGPT turned out to be completely fraudulent. It was completely fantasy, made up, and it certainly looked legitimate. And what was interesting, not just about the process, that the lawyer himself would have felt like that the content was valid is one thing, but the judge's response to the lawyer was actually the bigger takeaway for me. And it was, as a lawyer, that you've taken an oath that what you put in front of the court is to the best of your knowledge valid and accurate, and you've done your due diligence. And that responsibility and accountability, which is such a key component of what HR does in different processes, plays in even more so as we introduce AI into the mix, right? Great, AI wrote that job description, wonderful. Did you think further about how that's going to be presented to the world, right? That accountability is still there. And we're not yet in a position where we can really trust, everything that comes out of AI yet. May sound authoritative, may look authoritative, but that's where you as an individual, where your teams come into play and are so critical to success.
April, just a quick question, because I know we're going to talk into some of these suggestions as well. No, it's okay to go to the next slide. I appreciate that. And I'll give you a chance to take a drink there. One of the things around we are all using it in our own personal lives, right? So to your point, like we're not at the Hollywood version of AI yet. And in other ways, it shows up. Like I look at my Amazon shopping list and I get a summary at the top, and then Netflix serves stuff up. And then I have a really great positive story around some Apple Watch functionality recently that has just done amazing things in my personal life, right? But to your point, one of the things that I personally experienced was around generative AI as it relates to performance evaluations, right? And I'm going to date myself, but in the old days, I used to have this book, and it was effective phrases for performance evaluations. And I'd be like, oh, let me look through this book. You know, somebody's really great at this, they're not so great at this. How do I grab those phrases, combine it with the self-evaluation from an associate as well as feedback from other people. But at the end of the day, I was still accountable to write it. Same thing, the last year when I was looking at generative AI and writing those performance evaluations. Now I would say it was a great evaluation that I was like, wow, that was really great. But taking the self-evaluation, right? That input, taking feedback from others, combining that with goals and objectives. And I have to tell you from the efficiency perspective, it was super fast, right? And it came out great. It allowed me to have a good conversation. I still finally, at the end of it, had to be accountable for the final evaluation. That's my accountability as a leader. But it gave me time back to do other more important things. So I think the encouragement I would give to people is like, I think we're using it all in ways that we're not even really aware of. It's just kind of coming into our lives in commercial ways. And one question so just sort of a personal plug around the value in my own life, personally and professionally, but also, April, can you just really quickly talk about the difference between an enterprise version of generative AI and a commercial version? Because when I first heard some of that, it made a lot of sense, but I think it's an important grounding, especially when we think about vendors that are providing solutions in this space as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And for any of you who've ever had some very, how shall we say, colorful interactions with ChatGPT, you've probably wondered about the data that's driving it or driving some of those responses. And, I think each vendor is going to take their own approach. This is a very new space, right? And you're seeing a lot of vendors adapt very, very quickly to technology. One of the approaches that we took at Oracle is we went out to find an LLM, a generative AI model, similar to ChatGPT, but one that had been trained on data that was more focused for business use and enterprise use, right? So instead of being trained on the entire internet and, cat videos on Instagram, we have, something that's been trained for business data, right? And I think that's important because when we look at what are we focusing on, what are we trying to use this for, right? We need the LLM to be tuned to our needs. And that's not a very easy thing to come by, right? Some of the things that you're going to see out there, if people are using ChatGPT or some of the other alternatives out in the marketplace like Llama 2, there's several others now, they're not necessarily going to be able to control entirely for some of the colorfulness. And another term that you'll hear a lot with generative AI is something called hallucination. And a hallucination is when, kind of like that lawyer experienced in that story I told a moment ago, right? AI can generate something that looks legitimate, it looks valid, and even sounds, authoritative, but it's completely made up. And that type of phenomena is just a reality of working with large language models. And so one of the things that, in addition to being wise about the large language model we're choosing, another aspect of making this ready for the enterprise, we've kind of taken a two-pronged approach. We thought about fine-grained use cases. If you ask ChatGPT anything, it will respond with anything. But in the use cases within the enterprise, we can have very focused scenarios, right? A job description for this job, and don't do anything else. And so what's happening is that containment, bringing sort of the right words, to the front for people to look at and start with, really helps ensure that you're not getting as much of a hallucinatory event happening. It also ensures that your employees, whoever's engaging with that AI, is not going to be, how shall we say, soliciting inappropriate or inaccurate types of responses, right? It's very contained. And what you'll see, and even some of the ones that we have a little demo here, I hope it works in a moment, we don't allow a chat interface, right, back and forth to the LLM just yet. And I think that's a way to help rein in the power, but also get all the benefit, right? Really just focus it on what it can do really, really well, and leave it at that for now.
Yeah. Thank you for that sort of additional clarity around the data, the enterprise, and the commercial version. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. And you probably heard a lot of discussion with LLMs about how much power and energy, and specifically GPU power, it takes to train these LLMs. And that's something to keep in mind. Any vendor right now that's going to offer this, unless they are OpenAI themselves, they are probably partnering with some other company and their large language model in order to deliver features and functions. And at this point in time, the ability to train a large language model on specific data is still in its infancy. There's a lot of new techniques that are being evaluated, but they take a lot of time. And so you should still have this expectation right now in the near term. Generative AI is going to be helpful, but it's still not yet perfectly aware of everything it could be. And this is an industry-wide problem. Everyone's looking at these types of problems.
Yeah. I appreciate that. Now, as a good student and listening to everything that you said, I feel like on this slide, those suggestions are like the Netflix suggestions here, like what comes up next after I do something. The summarization is as much about my Amazon survey results, and bringing sort of that functionality into an enterprise version, and how it can support HR is, I'm most excited about assisted authoring, but that's probably just my goal to be efficient. How's that?
No, I am too. I mean, in reality, I think we may have crowdsourced these types of things in the past. If you ever, looked up how to write your good resume and, looked at examples in order to find the better words for your own. And we've all done this in some way, shape, or form. This is now kind of a contained and focused energy. And you're right, the assisted authoring use cases are there's so many examples, right? And these are just a few of some of the ones that we're starting with in Oracle on the HCM side. And we have a queue. There's hundreds of other ideas that have been submitted by customers and internally of where we could potentially target, right? And I think something to be aware of as you're looking at some of the vendors out there. And one thing to note too, not all vendors, despite what their marketing may claim, have been doing AI for a long time. And I think that's another aspect to look at with your vendor. Have they done this before? Are they doing this natively? It's one of the approaches with Oracle. We've been doing AI infusion for quite some time. And generative AI is just our latest flavor of AI, if you will, that we're offering our clients and customers. We have set up the infrastructure, the data security, the performance, and all of the back-end infrastructure that's required to make these AI solutions as powerful as they are. And generative AI is just another opportunity to showcase that back end. So definitely something to be pressing your vendors on, understanding what they have to offer in that space. So this is the video that we're not certain if it will work, so bear with me for just a moment. But I did want to show an assisted authoring example, the job posting use case, which I'll just kind of call it a couple of things. AI Assist, if you can see in the middle of the screen, there's a little button. And that AI Assist is how an individual can interact with this tool. We're looking at a blank job requisition. You see a job title posted. And what we've done in the background is our engineers have created what are called prompts. And you'll hear this term thrown around a lot. A prompt is basically the question or the content you send to a large language model in order to elicit a response, right? So if you added a question into ChatGPT, that's a prompt. And what we've done on the back end is really tailored these prompts to be situationally aware, understand who's logged in, understand some of the details of what job is being written for. And if you select the AI Assist button, and here's where, see, I hope it works. Now, is the video showing? I don't see the video showing.
It is.
Okay. It's strange. I think
what's interesting is I can see it in a presenter screen, but I don't know if I almost said the customers. I don't know if our attendees can see it.
Yeah, I'm not certain if they can either. Okay.
It showed instead of Lori's picture for me. Yeah.
That's probably a good thing. It was way more exciting than I am, so I'm cool with that.
It's showing.
It's showing. Oh, brilliant. Okay, well, let me navigate back to it. And thank you, everyone, for your patience with us.
Thank you. Yeah.
So appreciate it.
It's not perfect. Like AI is not perfect yet.
Exactly.
They can see it, yeah.
Okay, brilliant. So I think the nice thing, kind of like we were talking about, Lori, is give me the right words, give me something to start with. And that's what this AI generated content is doing for us. One of the things that you'll notice in this video is that there's a lot of content being generated for responsibilities, qualifications. And I don't know about you, but I've certainly looked at plenty of jobs in my time, written a few job recs in my time. And I know, talking to recruiters, that the quality of job recs is always something that is just a challenge. They may not be detailed enough. They may not even explain what's different about product manager one in Austin versus product manager one in San Francisco. And I think what's really exciting is not just, can we start with some of the great words that we need to get this kicked off, but let's get more detail. Let's provide a more complete type of job requisition. It really raises the bar for the potential for this job. And it also, I think, starts to address, and although it's always going to be a process of addressing, data quality, right, in HR. And this helps, right, to improve and grow and kind of change the standards. Really exciting, where that can take us and what that can mean for us over time. So thank you also for putting up with my voice today. I've been a little ill, so you're getting not the best voice today. But, I just want to kind of wrap up my side of the conversation today. I think there's absolutely opportunity here for HR. If anything, some of the back office, more mundane tasks that we take on in HR are really ripe for opportunity with generative AI. I really encourage you to work with your vendors, whoever that vendor may be. Talk with them about what your pain points are, understand what they're focused on in building and how that can help you specifically be selfish. Some of these tools are so powerful, and whether or not they're embedded in your solution, I suspect many of your employees may already be leveraging them on the side and maybe just not sharing that. But it's definitely something to think about. This is going to change how each of us work every day, and it's really going to change the organization. And I think it's important to embrace what's possible here and, make sure that part of your change management and rollout is really thinking through how to educate your employees and how to remind them that sometimes autopilot has to turn off so that you can course correct. And then, assessment. I definitely mentioned legal and compliance. They're your best friends. Bring them in for these conversations. Make sure that you talked about where you're comfortable taking those risks. Turn on features where they make sense. Don't turn them on just to turn them on. And I think that will really help you in thinking about where to go and where to get started. So with that, I'm going to hand over the reins to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, April. And what I was really pleased to see when you were getting the video going, actually, there were a lot of people in the Q&A saying we could see the video. So we know people are paying attention. Don't hesitate to put any questions in the chat. We're happy to answer anything. I think we're all really, really passionate about AI. So if you do have questions, please don't hesitate there. Everybody always asks me, though, Lori and April, how do you get started, right? And I'm going to piggyback on something you said, April. Those simple use cases that can be solved by AI, I think those have to be the priority. And then I hate the full phrase of this so much, but it's the keep it simple that approach, right? It's the way I've always been recommending our customers begin. And while you think of those simple use cases, what I have on the screen here is really an adaptation of the 7S framework. So strategy, right? As an HR leader, think about how AI aligns to your broader HR strategy. And if you're like most, it's improving and enhancing employee engagement. It's the talent management functionality and the recruiting space that was shown earlier, and just overall improving operational efficiency. I think with that though, it's critical if you want to adopt AI, you need to be that leader in the room, really championing the use of it, right? Be that example that AI is the tool that April was referencing to be harnessed and not feared. The next on there, scope for impact, meaning, where can AI make a significant difference in those HR processes, right? Could that be within the talent analytics space or the employee feedback systems, or possibly even just as simple as automating aspects of onboarding, right? And then assessing, the team's readiness, right? That skill set enhancement box there. Do you have people that are passionate about AI already? Ensure your team is equipped for the AI era, right? Develop programs to skill and upskill and reskill. There's so much good information out there that, on the internet as part of LinkedIn trainings or Udemy or parts of trainings that you already own. Take advantage of that, right? While you do that, I also think you think about what roles within HR would be most impacted. We talked about the spreadsheets earlier, right? Like, what capabilities do you need to develop for your team and map out those reskilling pathways and make sure they're aligned to your AI adoption plans? Sprint planning. That means launch those pilots, those simple use cases, those small wins that can really set the stage and showcase what is possible for broader AI integration, right? That might be something simple as a chatbot or digital assistant, or resume parsing is even a component of AI, because those are those things that are going to establish credibility, and you'll have learnings from them, right? Think of those things that take 3 months, 6 months, even less time, right? And then make sure you have a longer term roadmap that ties in those short-term initiatives to your overall strategic vision. Scaling with precision, right? Those pilot phases that I was talking about before full implementation, you can refine them, you could have learnings, and you can minimize risk by starting off with those quick wins. And then, it wouldn't be any kind of initiative, right, if you weren't thinking about measuring success and effectiveness. So how do you track various KPIs and metrics? Is that through feedback surveys? Is it looking at satisfaction scores? Or, do you have tangible proof too? Like, did I improve hiring time? Did I reduce turnovers? And then lastly, the AI in the HR landscape is ever evolving. And so should your approach to AI. You're going to need to keep adapting your HR strategy. You're going to keep adapting your AI strategy. That's going to keep happening. And I think it's a good idea to regularly seek feedback and be ready, to pivot as needed, really. And looks like we have some animation here. I hit on a lot of those points. What comes next though, right? There was a really powerful study by IBM, and I'm going to read this just because I think of how large this truly is, right? 40% of the workforce will need to reskill as a result of implementing AI and automation over the next 3 years. Now, I looked it up. I don't know if you realize 40% of the global workforce is 1.4 billion people. That is massive. And it's not just any specific type of worker that's going to be impacted. I know we talked about those low-level tasks, but this is going to eventually be so much more widespread that we're all going to feel the impact of generative AI. I do think, like we said though, right, it's going to start off in the short term with those entry-level type tasks, those things that are automated, that could be more, that are more repetitive in nature, but it will get so much bigger than that, right? And I know there's a lot of HR professionals on the call today. I think we think about the clients we serve, right? The workforce of the organization. We're not going to know it all, right? We can get help. I think we should be engaging other business leaders, other managers, top level employees, and understand their point of view on what types of tasks can be automated. They're going to have some great ideas, right? And we always say, right, those that are empowered are more satisfied at work. So if we empower the workforce to provide recommendations on how AI can make their jobs better and more fulfilling, we're going to have more success, right? Maybe when we're redesigning a process to incorporate AI, let's get some feedback during that design process. Let's encourage them to share insights and feedback. And then we talked about, just our side is, within HR, our roles within the organization are going to change. It doesn't mean they're going to be eliminated, but what I think we're going to really be seeing is jobs merging to create new ones as certain aspects of the existing jobs today are more automated. And then I think we're going to see roles expand to include other types of tasks, like how do I apply or even manage an AI tool, right? I just think about, and you guys probably already know this and are thinking about it, but we're going to see even just a seismic shift in our job libraries. Like, what are the skills needed for those jobs, and finding the right people with the right qualifications, as all of this change takes place. Let's see. Oh, we got all kinds of animations here. I'm going to just skip and put them all on the screen there. We built this slide because I think as an HR professional, we cannot be behind the rest of the workforce in the knowledge and the adoption of AI. I think that's why today's webinar is really powerful. I think a lot of the information out there is so important to keep taking in. To April, your example, right? The tool in the tool belt. I always love that. I take it a step further even. Like, if I were a carpenter before power tools, like, power tools don't eliminate the job, right? They enhance things to make them faster and easier. And if we think of AI as that capability, right? It's a tool in our tool belt to do things better where it makes sense, not going to replace things. Even just me, right? Like, if I had a drill, my wife will tell me that I don't hang things straight anyway, right? There is still skill behind all of this. So behind AI is always going to be, great humans and great workers to modify, adjust, interpret, and just so much more there.
Absolutely. Chris, just super quick, we've got some great questions coming in as well.
Okay.
And I know you have some good content to continue to cover. So I do want to, they're really great questions. So I want to go through the rest of the content, and then maybe we can have some time to address the questions that have come in.
Yeah,
because I think fundamentally what you're saying is not only is HR, our jobs are going to change in HR, but also, I spent a lot of time thinking. I was, used to say when evaluating work, you start with the work. Well, the work is going to change. So from an HR perspective, I'm facilitating or stewarding that work change for others as well. And then you think about what are those skills? How does that change from a comp perspective? I mean, so it's not just how the processes change for us, but also how do we, as stewards of an organization, support through either career or job architecture, whatever that is, the changing nature within the organizations that we support. Let me do this, but one of the questions that came in, so if we can go to the next slide really quick, and I do want to address them because they're pretty good. I think when we talk about these challenges, one of the questions that came in fits nicely here. Let me see if I can find it. Probably need some. Do we think we'll see any regulations from government to account for some positions that may change, or that may no longer exist? Do we see government stepping in at all? I'll surface that to both April and Chris.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think we're seeing government step in terms of protecting privacy, protecting sensitive data, managing use cases like in the talent acquisition world, where AI may introduce an unfair bias and unfairly discriminate against a person or set of persons. And I think that's going to continue, right? We're all going to ride that wave of legal and compliance in different ways. It's happening. If you haven't already, I would encourage you to take a look at the EU regulation draft that's been posted. Most likely will come to law in its current state. So take a read. It's definitely what's coming. In terms of the positions, I think that's an interesting question. It's really hard for me to comment on how a government would account specifically for those positions. But, I'll date myself here a little bit and just think back to, I grew up in a time, before the internet was a thing. And I think about my job these days and, knowledge of how to use the internet, how to use web pages, and how to use all of these things seems more natural now than it certainly did back when I was in grade school. But I had to learn those things and adapt. And my job has probably become very different in its current iteration than it was 20 years ago, right? So I think that, the one thing I will say, and Chris, I'm sorry if I'm stealing any of your thunder, but one thing I will say is that some of the things that are more important about these positions are the qualities we add to them. Great, we don't necessarily need a legal analyst to write a brief, but we certainly need somebody to review it. And we need somebody to validate it, right? And so thinking about that change and what the job is now, what are you looking for skill-wise? What are you looking for talent-wise? Those soft skills, if you will, are actually not what we're hiring for, but are really important, right? In a world where we're starting to have some of this done for us. Chris, I
appreciate. Sorry. Really quick, there's another question around just sort of the ethical impact, right? Which comes back to this slide as well, around just some of what we've heard around, I would say, bias. So how do we, I'm going to summarize the question, but how do we manage bias, especially in talent acquisition or recommended candidates or things like that? Do you have any suggestions there, April or Chris? And then we can go on to the next slide.
Yeah, I mean, April, I'll start and I'll let you sort of piggyback on this. And, the trend that I've been seeing also, too, is a lot of disclaimers around where AI is being used in various processes, being able to put that out there and making everybody aware of how it's potentially being used. I think it ties into all the points that we were making before, though, that AI should be the tool to help and assist, but not entirely replace, right? And I think, Lori, it was you that said it. Should I have AI make all my business decisions? No, we're not at that point there, right? And I would say the same thing for if we're looking to hire a candidate, right? We shouldn't say, oh, no personal interaction, this is the right person, and that's it. So that's where I would start. I think also understanding, the vendor landscape for the tools that you're using, right? How has, their model been trained to eliminate bias or reduce bias? And April, I'm sure you probably have a lot more comments in this area too.
Yeah, no, this is a really top of mind topic for us in Fusion HCM. And one of the things is ask the tough questions. Ask your vendor to pony up with what data is actually being used in what use case. So for example, we have a tool that suggests candidates to a recruiter or hiring manager. And the data points that we use for comparison to make those suggestions are extraordinarily limited. And they do not include a copy of a resume, which contains PII, and they do not include other types of sensitive data. And those are ways in which we continue to mitigate risk. We also internally have our own development processes that we honestly, and we are Oracle, we have an army of lawyers and data security and other individuals that we actually are accountable to as we release new product, that we're doing internal testing. Ask your vendors those details. Understand not every AI use case is the same. Not all of the data for that use case is the same as the data for the job description use case. There are lots of different elements here. And just because it's AI, it doesn't necessarily mean that AI has every bit of data in the world. So I hope that helps.
Yes, no, thank you. There's one more question. I'm going to hold it because I have a question about it just for me. But Chris, why don't you go to the next slide and then I'll use that other question at the end.
Yeah, sure. And I mean, yeah, with the limited amount of time here, I think, the
Right.
challenges, yeah. Yeah, the challenges we have here, we've hit a lot on these, right? The regulatory compliance. April, you talked about change management, the ethical considerations, emerging technology, right? I think we talked about so many new vendors popping up in the AI space. I think, everybody's quick to get on the hype train of creating an AI product. And do you really need a separate standalone, piece for this, or is this something that your existing vendor already has today, where you may be able to leverage it, and that integration with your existing systems? So I think we hit on these. These are a great list for you guys to just keep in mind as you're, going forward with your example. But Lori, maybe we do talk a little bit about that question, because I have a few thoughts even too from here.
I think one of the things to think about when you're adopting AI or any new technology inside your organization, you have to think about what is our culture, right? That's like, if I have a culture that's high touch, very personalized, the ways that I'm going to apply AI inside that culture probably aren't going to be in those human interactions that are my strategic differentiator. They're going to be in other areas that drive efficiency. So one of the questions that came in was like, hey, can I get AI to submit payroll with this effective date? And what about that? And it's an interesting question, because I always wonder, what's the difference between a really, really strong if then else statement and AI? And what does that look like? And where are those decision parameters? And how to begin to think about that from an efficiency perspective? Because you could absolutely have AI do that if certain parameters are met, and submit payroll with this, with certain criteria in there.
And Lori, maybe I can take it a
sorry.
We're so excited. We're so excited.
We're all right. So I like this one a lot, though, too, because I think of it, and I'll use a very simplistic example, right? The fraud detection from the credit card companies, right? You get a text message when you see something out of the norm, right? So I think something as simple as submitting a payroll transaction, that's very doable, but I'd love to see it go a step further, right? Flag me on the anomalies, right? Is there something that doesn't sit right? Did somebody have a salary that was higher than expected, or working hours outside of a condition, right? And AI can learn from those scenarios and do more there. So I challenge it to even think further than the question there about just submitting a payroll, but what else can it do for me, and eliminate the things that I was trying to check for previously.
Yeah, I agree, Chris. And I think, your question is really important, because kind of going back to some of the basics we started with, knowing what AI can and can't do is part of our responsibility as leaders in this space. If then else statements might be the right answer for certain types of questions. And AI is a very powerful tool. Right now, everything looks like an AI problem. I'm sure my cats are using AI in their spare time. But AI is a very expensive tool in a lot of ways. It's expensive to run. It's expensive to embed. And so when you're thinking about more complex use cases, Chris's example is a great AI use case. So looking for abnormalities or looking for patterns. Those are areas where you start to get AI involved for more complex scenarios. Think about when you're looking at recommendations, we're trying to find the right candidate. You think about the volume of data I'd have to look at, all the jobs, all the candidates, right? AI is very good at processing lots of data, right? And those are the use cases where you're probably going to see the biggest bang for your buck, if you will, when it comes to an AI use case. So not everything is an AI problem, but there are so many types of machine learning, right? We've only touched on a few. Different kinds of solutions might be out there depending on the HR problem at hand. So good for us to be educated.
Absolutely. We did get a question that came in specific to Oracle AI. And does Oracle AI allow for it to be trained solely on organizational data, or is it a combination of public and organizational data?
That's a great question. It's actually a complex question, and because we have different models. So for our more traditional recommendation and prediction engines, our AI is trained on data within each customer's tenant. We do not share data across customer tenants. So those use cases, I'll keep with the candidate recommendation use case because we've been talking about it. That's an example of an AI model that is learning from the data that that customer has and is making recommendations based on that data. That's very different, though, from generative AI. So generative AI right now, we partner with a third party called Cohere. And Cohere is our large language model that's going to drive the use cases like the video that you saw earlier. And Cohere and large language models in general are right now shared, the data share is the prompt. So being able to tell the LLM, I need a job title for a marketing manager, that level of detail in the prompt is what's being shared. The training of the large language model is such a GPU intensive exercise that is being handled by the vendors themselves. There is, and we are researching plans to work on ways we can train and or work with customer data in a more cohesive way. Right now, prompts are very limited. I think it's limited to about 500 characters, give or take, that can go into a prompt. We're looking at ways that we can expand what kind of data an LLM is aware of. And this is an industry-wide problem. So if anyone is telling you that they're training your LLM or their LLM on your data, you might want to ask a few clarifying questions. Ask them what the LLM is. Ask them why or how they're training on your data, because that is a GPU and time-intensive, labor-intensive process that takes months, not a day or a few hours.
With the time we have next, let's go to the next slide here. Yeah, we know this is true, right? Like, if we're not this, as we started this conversation, this is moving, and there is. I met with a CHRO recently, and it was an amazing conversation around my managers are billable. I need to make them more efficient. So how can I then begin to adopt more significantly, right, inside my organization? It becomes a strategic differentiator for us. And, I see that gap widening if organizations aren't willing to adopt it. Let's go ahead and move to the next slide, Chris, if that's okay.
Yeah, and this is sort of our shameless plug just for those that aren't an Oracle Cloud customer today, right? It's a joint partnership between Oracle and Argano, right? If you're a mid-sized organization, think, more US-centric, having an opportunity now to be able to leverage the power of an Oracle solution, right? All the great capabilities like the Gen AI and those robust AI capabilities at an implementation price point that's much more palatable than ever before. So that's the quick summary.
It's a quick start. No, it's I appreciate that. It's a very quick start way to begin to move from where you are today to just everything that tomorrow has to offer. As we begin to wrap, one of the questions that came into chat, and I'll go ahead and take it as well, was around are there risks with AI doing something incorrect, like a process being run incorrectly? And the example was maybe they submit payroll incorrectly. And the thing that I would come back with and say is I've seen people submit payroll incorrectly, right? At the end of the day, I think that there'll still be a person to review it, evaluate it, and then click the button, make it go, assume the responsibility at the end for the task once it's been evaluated. So I think that those will always exist. When I first started in this role, I had a person say, this is so interesting to me, because I was like, what? The customer said, I would really want the process to be, it was around hiring, as automated and predictable as possible through the use of AI and other, process frameworks, like whether it's journeys or something along those lines, because I believe my candidates will have a better, more consistent experience than if I had 25 recruiters doing it themselves. And it gave me pause, right? It was just sort of an interesting thing. And, as we think about ways that technology can support us, it's just something to think about inside your organizations. And to echo what April and Chris said, start small in, where the need might be the greatest, evaluate it for a while, and then begin to embrace it inside the organization. It's like when we used to do, I have a background in assessments, and I would do assessments for selection. There's a burn-in period after you start using that, and you validate it through the lens of the experts to the outcome that they want. So I would just encourage us all that that's something, a way that we can approach this. Let's go ahead to the next slide. Just if, I think one of the things I would say as we begin to wrap here, actually I can hit the next button. I'm like, hey, go next slide. Ooh, I go back. There we go. If you guys, our contact information is across the top here. I know we have like 40 seconds left. If you have additional questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. We each bring a different area of expertise to it. At the end of the day, I would say on behalf of Chris and April, like we just really appreciate you spending time with us as we kind of have this conversation and go on this journey. And we're here to help you, right? And we're all moving forward in this space together. So thank you for your time. We appreciate it. Thank you, Chris and April. And April, I know you weren't feeling 100%, so thank you so much. And just for the discussion. So we really appreciate you.
Yep, thank
and
you
with
all.
that, I really appreciate the partnership, you guys. Thanks, and everybody have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye now. Thank you.
Yeah.